Analysis of Oddity, Objetos Obscuros. Part the Sioux Introduction to the film's premise and narrative style. Oddity, Objetos Obscuros, 2023, directed by Carlos Meirelles, is a Brazilian psychological horror film that stands out not only for its eerie atmosphere but also for the intricacy of its narrative. The film presents a complex story centered around the mysterious and supernatural phenomena caused by objects that seem to hold inexplicable power. These objects act as both literal and metaphorical catalysts in the unraveling of the protagonist's troubled psyche, leading him into a profound confrontation with his own past. The central plot follows Alexandre, a man who becomes obsessed with a series of bizarre, seemingly cursed objects. As the story unfolds, it becomes evident that these objects are more than just vessels of terror. They are symbolic, linked to his memories, traumas, and psychological struggles. The narrative unfolds in a non-linear fashion, leaving the viewer piecing together the puzzle of Alexandre's past and the increasingly distorted reality around him. One of the film's most distinctive features is its use of fragmented storytelling. The viewer is not presented with a simple beginning, middle, and end, but instead with a constantly shifting timeline that mirrors Alexandre's fractured mental state. Through the use of flashbacks and ambiguous clues, the film keeps its audience guessing and invites them to interpret the truth for themselves. This non-linear approach to storytelling is a risky choice that may leave some viewers frustrated, but it's an intentional and powerful device that deepens the psychological complexity of the film. The psychological horror of Oddity. At its core, Oddity, Objetos Obscuros, is not a traditional horror film. It doesn't rely on jump scares or grotesque monsters lurking in the shadows. Instead, it focuses on a more cerebral form of terror, one that infiltrates the mind and unsettles the viewer at a deeper emotional and intellectual level. The horror in Oddity is psychological. It builds not through external threats but through the gradual erosion of the protagonist's sense of reality. From the beginning, Carlos Meirelles introduces an atmosphere of unease and tension. The very objects that appear innocent at first glance, such as a collection of seemingly mundane items, become the symbols of fear, torment, and psychological breakdown. These objects take on a supernatural quality, growing in power as they start to manipulate Alexandre's perceptions. The objects do not just serve as plot devices. They embody the deepest fears of the characters and, by extension, the audience. In this way, Oddity taps into a deeply rooted form of horror, one that evokes existential fear. The true terror is not the objects themselves, but the idea that our perception of reality can be distorted beyond recognition. The objects represent the things we cannot control: our memories, our past traumas, and our ever-shifting understanding of the world around us. This is a theme that runs through many psychological thrillers, but Oddity presents it in a unique and unnerving way. The use of atmosphere and visual storytelling, an essential aspect of Oddity, Objetos Obscuros, is the director's meticulous attention to the film's atmosphere. Every frame is carefully composed to evoke a sense of dread. The film is shot in muted colors, with a heavy reliance on shadows and dim lighting, which creates a sense of claustrophobia and impending doom. The cinematography is both beautiful and unsettling, with the mise en scène amplifying the psychological tension that pervades the narrative. The camera work in Oddity is another standout feature. Rather than relying on rapid cuts or flashy visuals, the film often lingers on still frames, forcing the viewer to absorb every detail and subtle shift in the environment. This creates a slow-burning sense of discomfort as the objects in question begin to take on an almost sentient quality, subtly influencing their surroundings. The effect is hypnotic, drawing the audience deeper into the labyrinth of Alexandre's fractured consciousness. The score also plays a pivotal role in establishing the eerie tone of the film. The music, composed by Pedro Lima, is haunting and minimalistic, often consisting of long, drawn-out notes and discordant tones that mirror the character's internal turmoil. The soundtrack is designed not to provide comfort, but to heighten the unease, Its presence is ever felt but never overwhelming, leaving room for silence and tension to breathe. Analysis of Oddity, Objetos Obscuros. Part: Characterization. The depth of Alexandre's struggle. The film's protagonist, Alexandre, is a deeply flawed character whose struggle with his past is at the heart of the narrative. Played with intense vulnerability by Felipe Nunes, Alexandre is a man haunted by his memories. His obsession with the mysterious objects stems from an inability to reconcile his past with his present self. As the film progresses, we learn that his troubled childhood, repressed memories, and unresolved guilt play a pivotal role in the breakdown of his mind. The character's internal conflict is portrayed with subtlety and nuance. Alexandre is not a simple victim of external supernatural forces, but a man who is also battling the darkest recesses of his own psyche. The objects may seem to have power over him, but they are also mirrors reflecting the most painful aspects of his personality. His relationship with the objects is not just one of fear, it is also one of longing, as if these cursed artifacts hold the key to unlocking a truth about himself that he has long suppressed. One of the most poignant aspects of Alexandre's journey is the way the film portrays his vulnerability. As the supernatural events become more intense, Alexandre finds himself unraveling in ways that make him more relatable and human. This is not the typical portrayal of a man in crisis. It's a more personal, intimate descent into madness that speaks to the universal fear of losing control over one's mind and memories. The role of memory and trauma in shaping reality. At its core, Oddity is a film about memory, trauma, and how the past shapes our present. The objects in the film are not merely objects, they are physical manifestations of Alexandre's repressed memories. Each item acts as a trigger, pulling him back into a past he cannot fully remember but is deeply affected by. The non-linear structure of the film echoes the fragmented nature of memory, as Alexandre is forced to piece together his past, revealing painful truths about his childhood and family. The use of trauma as a central theme is what makes Oddity stand out from typical horror fare. The film suggests that our memories are not static, they are malleable, distorted by the trauma we experience. Alexandre's inability to fully understand or confront his past makes him susceptible to the manipulation of these objects, and by extension, to the shifting reality that they create. The horror in Oddity doesn't lie in supernatural entities or creatures, but in the way our own minds can betray us. In many ways, the objects themselves serve as a metaphor for the past, something that cannot be fully understood or controlled, yet constantly influences the present. This idea resonates with anyone who has struggled with the weight of memory and the ways in which it shapes their identity. The film forces the audience to confront their own fears and doubts about how much control they truly have over their own histories. The visual metaphor of objects as externalized memory. The objects in Oddity are not just random artifacts, they are visual metaphors for the psychological weight of memory. Each object carries its own symbolic meaning, often tied to specific events in Alexandre's life. For example, an old family heirloom that initially seems benign eventually becomes an unsettling presence in the story, representing the fractured relationship between Alexandre and his family. As the film progresses, it becomes clear that the objects are not simply external threats but extensions of Alexandre's inner turmoil. By externalizing memory in the form of physical objects, Carlos Mireles takes a concept that is inherently intangible and makes it visceral. The objects are, in a sense, tangible manifestations of the character's mental state, objects that cannot be ignored or rationalized away. Their presence serves as a constant reminder of Alexandre's inability to escape his past, no matter how much he may try. This use of objects as symbols of trauma is a powerful and unsettling way to explore the psychological horror genre. It blurs the line between reality and the subconscious, creating a haunting atmosphere that lingers long after the film ends. Analysis of Oddity, Objetos Obscuros. Part 3, Subversion of Genres and Cinematic Influences. One of the most intriguing aspects of Oddity Objetos Obscuros is the way the film subverts traditional mystery and psychological horror genres. Rather than following a tried-and-true formula, Carlos Mireles blends multiple genres, creating a unique experience for the viewer. The film begins with classic elements of a mystery, with a protagonist caught up in a series of inexplicable events. However, as the narrative unfolds, the tone becomes increasingly abstract and philosophical, moving away from a linear plot and delving into emotional and psychological complexity. This fusion of different genres is not a casual choice, but a deliberate strategy by the director to challenge the audience's expectations. While it takes the viewer on a suspense-filled journey, Oddity also pushes us to question the boundaries of horror, reality, and cinematic storytelling. It's a film that plays with genre conventions, constantly defying easy categorization. In terms of influence, Oddity shares thematic and stylistic similarities with other films that explore the supernatural through a psychological lens. Directors like David Lynch and Darren Aronofsky have tackled similar themes of psychological disintegration and the blurring of reality and illusion, and their influence is felt in Oddity's dreamlike, surreal atmosphere. While Oddity is undoubtedly a work that draws on established cinematic traditions, it also paves the way for a new wave of horror films that blend the supernatural with the deeply personal. By blending elements of psychological drama with horror, Carlos Mireles crafts a movie that challenges audiences to think critically about both the medium and the genre. Final thoughts: the legacy of Oddity. Objetos Obscuros is, above all, a film about memory, trauma, and perception. It challenges viewers to confront the darkness within their own minds and to question the boundaries between reality and illusion. While it may not be for everyone, its non-linear narrative and ambiguous ending will certainly alienate some. Its emotional depth and philosophical exploration make it a standout in the realm of psychological horror. Carlos Mireles has created a deeply unsettling film that lingers long after the credits roll. It is a work that demands attention and introspection, one that invites the viewer to interpret its meaning, even as it resists providing easy answers. Oddity will likely be remembered as a pioneering work in the psychological horror genre, and it may inspire a new wave of filmmakers who are willing to take risks with narrative complexity and emotional depth. The film's impact will likely be felt for years to come, as it challenges the conventions of horror cinema and offers a meditation on the most universal and terrifying aspect of the human experience, our own minds. And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into Oddity.